Boa noite. Meu nome é Bárbara Castro. Boas-vindas a todos e todas.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bárbara Castro. Welcome, everyone. It is with great joy that we open the 6th conference, CODA BR. It's a meeting organized by Escola de Dados, a program by Open Knowledge Brazil, developed in partnership with the Google News Initiative. Tonight, in the second day of CODA BR 2021, we have the keynote speaker, Gurman Bhatia, talking about data visualization for all. She's an awarded data journalist from New Delhi in India. In the last 7 years, she's used data, visual resources, and code to create narratives based on data in international and national contexts. She has a master's degree in journalism by Columbia University in New York, and her work was awarded internationally, including Online News Association Awards, Mafias Infographics Summit Awards, and Data Journalism Awards. The activity today will be initiated by introducing our guests, followed by a Q&A live session mediated by me. Your questions may be sent through the comments session on YouTube. I wish you all a good meeting.
Hello everyone. My name is Gurman Bhatia and I'm an independent database designer and data journalist based in India. This is the first time I'm attending a Latin American conference, so I'm super excited to be here. Today I'm going to be talking about what can we do, what do we need to do, and what have we done so far to bring the power of database to everyone. If I am to talk about my work is a combination of 4 things at the moment. There is journalism, so actual reporting. I have worked in local, national, international newsrooms to find ways of bringing data and visual storytelling to your everyday reporting. Then I teach whatever little I know and have acquired over the years. I love to share that with other people like you, so that, that opportunity to learn from each other. I think teaching is a great way to get that. Then the third is database. The core of everything that I do is data-driven storytelling. That's what I use in journalism. That's what I use in teaching. And the last bit is code. So I am also a self-taught developer. So the idea is, how can we deploy technology to make tasks easier for us, to add superpowers to your journalism? I think like technology has the potential to do that. So using code to do that. Now, when I think about data visualization, I think it lives in like several dual worlds. There are several dichotomies in database. There are 2 sides to a lot of things. And let's see some of those. So on one hand, you have stories and explanations. And on the other hand, you have dashboards and explorations. So a journalist like me might decide this is the bit that I want to explain to the reader. I might pick out the key insights from my story for my data and use, database as a tool to explain that story, right? So I, as a journalist and the storyteller, am navigating the reader through something. And the second aspect is where you have a dashboard where there are lots of stories scattered, but it's really up to the reader to play with tools and techniques to figure those out. It's for the reader to explore what might be the story that's most relevant to them. Then another aspect to it is, those really beautiful, unique visualizations that are not your run-of-the-mill bar graph or line graph. They are different and they are artistic, yet powerful at conveying a message. Oftentimes, these bespoke and customized visualizations are designed to incite emotion. Another aspect is traditional tool-driven data visualization. So, these might be your more traditional charts, things that people are familiar with, which means the threshold for people to understanding it is low. It will be easier for more and more people to get what your viz means if it follows a chart type that's pretty familiarized and pretty popular. These are two visualizations on screen that tell exactly the same story. Where do people come from to the US in terms of migration over the years, how that has changed. But if you look at it, the treatment is so different. So it's the same story, but shown with the bespoke visualization and shown within stacked area chart. Then another aspect to these dualities is interactive graphics. So stuff where things move, where I click on a button and something happens, and static charts. So these might be, again, things that I have decided are the most relevant for the reader, and using annotations and text, creating a static experience that makes the most sense for that particular message that I need to convey. And as you can see that, these many roles have many forms. All of these different kinds of treatment come with a very specific purpose. They are for a specific audience, they are for a specific messaging, and depending on your use case, you might pick what makes the most sense for you. And to recap, you have your stories, and on the other side, you have dashboards. On one hand, you have explanatory content, and on the other hand, you have places where you can explore information. On one hand, you have your bespoke, beautiful visualizations, and on the other hand, you have traditional and more familiar visualizations. On one hand, you have stuff that is customized and unique and custom coded, and on the other hand, you have things that you can churn out pretty quickly using tools. On one hand, you have interactivity, and on the other hand, you have a static experience. Now, if you think of it, all these forms are gaining popularity, and they are gaining popularity across the spectrum and across industries. So data journalism is one place where data viz is picking up. You can also say that data viz is picking up in research. More and more research communication is also thinking how they can communicate data better. You can use it in public policy. So this is something that is made by the US Census Bureau. You can also be in nonprofit NGO working on a particular use case, a very specific area, and you can use data viz to communicate parts of what might be happening in that specific domain using visualizations. And you can also be a corporate entity to visualize your own proprietary data. That is another use case. And as I talk about all these different possibilities, you can easily see that data visualization is catching on. And a lot has happened recently that has contributed to this catching on. So one is better tools. You have no-code solutions that didn't exist a couple of years ago. So when I started my career, the need to code was high. There were few visualizations I could make if I didn't write T3. We'll talk about it a little later as well, but it's a JavaScript library used to create those bespoke visualizations or like interactive visualizations on the web. So there wasn't a lot that you could do 7-8 years ago without D3 in terms of interactivity. But now you have tools such as Data Wrapper and Flourish, which are meant for storytellers. In fact, the senior level people, you know, the CT of Data Wrapper, the founder of Flourish, are all people who are former journalists and graphic journalists. So people who come with the storytelling mindset. So with tools like Data Wrapper, for example, you can make heat maps, connected scatter plots, annotated charts, stuff that really enhances a story. Most of Data Wrapper's work, although there will be, you know, tooltips that you can use, the data itself is mostly static. Even though you can link data sets that update every day or so on it, and Data Wrapper would load with active data. Then there is Flourish, for example, which is more when you want things to fly and move and stuff to happen as the story advances. That could be, maybe it's this bar chart race. It could also mean that you have these scrolly telling sorts of pieces. This particular piece is from the pudding. Several years ago, when I started my career, using D3 would have been kind of really important, using D3 and other scrolly telling libraries to make something like this. You wouldn't be able to do a scrolly telling piece without code. But with the Flourish and like these tools, you have the mechanism to do that. And while Data Wrapper and Flourish are tools on the storytelling end, there are also tools on the dashboard end, such as Tableau or Power BI that have these rapidly increasing communities. And the logic here is, of course, for more internal corporate purposes or even public facing dashboards. These tools make it very intuitive for people to create these exploratory data viz. And on the other side of the tools thing, you also have low code solutions. For example, Plot, which is a product of Observable, which came out of the same person that created D3. Mike Bostock is the founder of D3, is also the founder of Observable. And in Observable, for example, I can create a scatter chart such as this using the one line of code that you can see at the bottom. So one line of code can quickly create a nice chart. Similarly, you have other libraries such as these. There is Plotly, which is a Python and a library. Here, the screenshot you have is from the Python environment, but it can also be used in other environments. And again, couple of lines of code, very few. Most of it is just telling that, you know, X should be this, Y should be that. Mostly it's just that. And you can quickly get a chart. Then within R, you have something called ggplot, which is again something similar. You give it, this should be the color, this should be the x-axis, this should be the y-axis. This is what I want my labels to be. And you can clearly, very quickly generate plots such as these. And on the other side of the code thing is something like D3. D3 is extremely powerful because it gives you complete control of what your visualization can be. While it is immensely useful for visualizations that are highly unique and custom, for making a more simpler chart, it might have a lot of overhead. For example, I'll have to write these many lines of code, add these many lines of code, I write even more code, and only then will I be able to make a bar chart such as this. So if you want to make a bar chart, maybe D3 is not the best bet. If you want to make something that's extremely unique and custom, maybe it is. The second thing that has happened in the past couple of years is that we have built a stronger data viz community. There are several generic groups that anybody can join. activities that anybody can be a part of that are great to be part of the community. For example, there is Data Visualization Society, Slack. The Data Visualization Society is a group in itself, but the Slack is one place where several people, whether you are a paid member or not, you can join the Slack to discuss ideas, brainstorm with peers, look for jobs, get feedback, all sorts of things. At the time of making this presentation, the Data Visualization Slack had roughly over 16,000 members. Then you have something called Makeover Monday, where a chart and a data set that was used to make that chart is released every week, and you just give the chart a makeover. Although the activity is no longer running, Makeover Monday has shut shop, but the prior exercises and activities are still available. So if you're someone who wants to practice, can go on and check these activities. It is still a very active community. Then another one is Workout Wednesday, where you are given a chart and you recreate a chart. So in Makeover Monday, you are giving the chart a makeover. In Workout Wednesday, you are recreating the same chart. Then something that's running right now is 30-day map challenge. So Topi is the person who started this. And the idea is that there are daily prompts for every day of November, and people just gather to make maps of different kinds. You have Viz for Social Good, which looks at nonprofits and creates activities around that. Then there are tool-specific activities. For example, Tidy Tuesday is one. Tidy Tuesdays for R. Iron Quest is something for Tableau. Real World Fake Data is something that focuses on corporate data visualization dashboards. Then D3 also has its own Slack. So one place where you can learn from your peers that focused on that particular tool. Another thing that has happened is now that we have a wealth of cheap and free online resources to learn. So Data Wrapper, Flourish, Observable, different tools that I mentioned earlier, all of them have their own very strong set of tutorials available. And the tutorials not just focus on the tool, but also on the craft. So how do you clean a data set? What things to look for if your data set needs to be formatted in a certain way? How do I use pivot tables? What colors should I use in my visualizations? What kind of scale fits in this particular map? So very specific questions that cater to the design of data visualizations. Some of these tutorials also cover those aspects. And then there are also individuals that contribute to this whole tutorial learning community. So just to name a few, there is Shirley Wu, Amelia Wattenberger, who has a very popular book called Full Stack D3 and Data Viz, Cedric Schroer, whose focuses on ggplot and how to make beautiful data visualizations in R. So, similarly, based on whichever tool you might be interested in, there are all these individuals that are also making more technical tools accessible through these tutorials. The fourth thing that has happened is the rise of visual platforms in general. I might be part of these groups. I might learn how to use a tool. I might create things as well, but it's immensely important to have places where we can share the work that we create, because it's only when we put stuff out in the world that the desire to create more comes in, because you will get a feedback loop if people like it, if people resonate with something you've made. It gives you a greater incentive or a greater motivation to go back and create more. One of the most popular ones and earliest ones in this game is obviously Reddit. So Reddit has this subreddit called Data is Beautiful, and it has some over 16 million members, users. And like this is one of the topmost posts from this month, I think. And the chart shows that Walt Disney's world ticket price, how much has it increased with respect to everyday things such as wages, rent, and gas. So how that compares. Something, very basic. It's not a fancy chart, but it's something that people can resonate with. So it ends up performing quite well on places such as these. And then it just travels. Another platform is, of course, Instagram. Instagram is a highly visual platform, and Dados, so is Dados. So obviously a very good match in that sense. This is a screenshot from a chart made by Mona Chalabi. It's not your traditional chart. It's average number of dentist consultations per person per year depicted through teeth. So, using visual metaphors to convey data is something that Mona Chalabi is great at. And it's also something that does wonders on a platform like Instagram. Then, of course, there's Twitter. So Twitter has these hashtags that float around, whether that's Ray Shader or RStats, which are very tool specific things. But then you also have DataViz or DDJ, which is data driven journalism, or the 30-day Mac challenge, for example, is ongoing right now. So that's another there. So like these, the discovery of more work through these hashtags just like flows in the community. And there's a lot to learn from and get inspiration by looking at these. That's what I do. I track a bunch of data visualization related hashtags on Twitter to find inspiration. What you see on your screen right now is this person who makes 3D population density maps of different countries one by one. And you have that. And talking of 3D, you can also share stuff on LinkedIn. LinkedIn has this whole data science, corporate data storytelling thing happening. So a lot of people who are interested in that domain are active on the platform. This, for example, is from Craig Taylor, who is database designer who works with transit data. And as you can see that in that globe, actually the movement of those points or lines that you see are actually bus routes and bus rides. So again, using something that's beautiful. The previous one we saw was in R. This one uses a software called Houdini. And they're different tools and different concepts on different platforms, but they both resonate with people and on different levels. And the previous point flows into this one, which is that we are increasing visual and data literacy. Visual literacy is something that is also known to be called graphicacy. So how adept are we at understanding graphics? And one big contributor to this rise is just that there's more content. As all of us consume more and more information of a certain kind, our familiarity with it increases. COVID is a classic example. We all have looked at line charts and bar charts throughout this pandemic to understand where we are on the curve, to understand whether I should send my kids to school, whether I should go to work, whether I should go and have an indoor meal at all at a restaurant. So these are questions that have been dictated through line charts in the past year. And to think of it, that data having that kind of power, I never thought of it in that detail before the pandemic. And sometimes, as we progress through information, the complexity of our information can also increase. For example, FT used to do these trajectory charts of where different countries, select countries might be in their pandemic. And if you will see, they use a log scale. So the difference between the regular scale and a log scale is if your regular scale goes from 10, 20, 30, and the breaks are such, in a log scale, it would increase exponentially. So you would go from 10 to 20 to 40 to 80. So it doubles. And what that means is that because disease is something, or like in a pandemic, the virus spreads exponentially because more people get to infect more people, and it just spreads. So because of that, using a log chart makes sense because you are you're comparing something that is exponential in nature. Now, me explaining all of this just by talking about it is extremely confusing. So if it's confusing to an open data audience, it would be even more confusing for a daily reader. So does that mean that we don't do these complicated charts? Maybe not. FT, for example, as they made these charts popular, they also released explanations on how to read these charts. So they did a video explanation to tell people how this works. Now, while one scenario could be that I don't advance the level of the audience at all, here what FE is trying to do is teach the audience and educate the audience and enhance their learning level as well. And the sixth thing that has happened is that we have a slow and steady shift to stronger communication techniques. Now, these are things not unique to journalism. Not new in journalism. Journalism has had the focus on storytelling and communication from its core. That's the heart of journalism. But other disciplines might still not be that familiar with direct headlines and direct titles and key insights being communicated through the data visualizations that we make. For example, this is a chart from NYT. And as you can see, this chart sits right below the story headline. And the headline for the story also ends up acting as a headline for a chart. And it's nothing boring like estimated gun sales per month. It is something very direct that tells me the story that about 2 million guns were sold in the US as virus fears spread. So something that's very pointed, something that gives me insight, not something that's very generic. That's a communication technique that we're using. And at the same time in this chart, we see lots of annotations to give context on the spikes that we see. Amanda Cox, who's the editor at The Upshot, says this, that the annotation layer is the most important thing we do, because annotations are what add context to your visualization. A database devoid of context is not something that tells the story on its own. It needs more information to tell the complete story. But to make visualizations that are mini stories that can travel the world on their own, we need to use annotations and text quite heavily on the chart. And the last point I have in this section is just the fact that there is more data. As there is more and more data that we collect, there will be more and more data that we have to visualize. So if we are creating data through wearable devices, through our social media platforms, through dark social platforms, through through the basic consumption of just going and getting in a vaccine, we are also creating data. So our everyday activities getting affected and captured in data sets means that there are more and more stories that data will empower us to tell. And while all of this shift is happening, and these are all great things that have happened and have led to the spread of data journalism to more and more people, we have still much further to go. For starters, we are still pretty bad at communicating uncertainty. For example, this, known as the cone of uncertainty, could be easily the most confusing database that we see in our day-to-day lives, and something that actually affects our safety. So most people who look at this believe that the path of the tornado or the storm might be the black line, but that's not true. The fact is that the path could be anywhere in the cone, and that's just the path. In actual terms, the damage could be well outside the path, projected path as well. Then elections are one classic example of where probabilities and uncertainty get in polls get confused or misread. So looking at this, you might be like, Biden is going to win. But the fact is that what this is saying is that Trump has a chance of winning too. The chances are lower than that of Biden's, but it's not impossible. So it's not something certain. So like thinking of how we communicate the uncertainty attached to surveys and polls and these obvious things where we are sampling a smaller data set or a smaller set of population to project to what might happen in a bigger set is bound to have errors, is bound to have uncertainties attached to the results. And it is our job and our duty to communicate that uncertainty to our readers. Another thing that is problematic amongst all of this is that too much data is also bad. So for example, more data means that we have more noise to filter through. This becomes incredibly true for dashboards. Dashboards, for example, end up showing too much. We have massive houses of information. Our tendency is to show everything, which means instead of informing the reader, we might just end up overwhelming the reader, and it's hard to walk away with the key insight. And that's something that happens quite frequently when dealing with large data sets. So another thing that we need to work on is to make sure that our visualizations are accessible. When I say accessible, I mean people on different internet bandwidth should be able to see it. People who can't afford a fancy device are able to see it. Then again, people who use screen readers are able to see it. People who have visual disabilities or people who are colorblind are able to decipher the meaning. A lot of visualizations still lack this. Here is a chart shared by the New York Times on Twitter. If I look at the alt text is what a screen reader would read out when I click on it. If I see the alt text for this chart, it says image. If I look at this chart from BBC and what the alt text says, it says image. So, all these charts and all the information that they would provide, someone who uses a screen reader will not be able to get any of it, because all we wrote in the alt text was image. I'm not pointing fingers here. This is something that lacks across the board. Most of my work is not accessible at all. If you hooked up a screen reader with most of my previous work, it would collapse as well. Like the screen reader might say image and unnecessary things that hinder the person's experience. So much so that Sarah Fossheim, who is a database designer and focuses a lot on accessibility, had written this blog post that took apart election visualizations one by one on how bad they were in terms of accessibility. I'm gonna show some bits from this. So if you look at this blog post, Sarah looks at different election visualizations and how they perform on accessibility. Let's see. So, you know, a lot of mainstream election maps look like this, and they use a voice reader with
image, 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 one face, image, logo other, image, image.
So what is happening is that as they swipe, it is constantly changing states, but as it's changing states, it's not giving me anything on the status or which stage it is, nothing. All I'm getting is image, 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 which is not helpful at all, of course, and is actually pretty bad experience. Similarly,
level 3 link, Georgia, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70%. Share of A, votes reported, 0%, 25%, 50%, 75%. Race called, 92% reported, 50.5%, 48.3%. Heading level 3.
See, like all those numbers probably give you a headache, but the area is it's instead of giving relevant information to the reader, what this here is doing is reading out the tick marks. So again, something that would not be a good accessible experience.
Heading level 1, presidential election results. Joe Biden, image 264. Joe Biden. Kamala Harris. Donald Trump, image 214. Donald Trump. Mike Pence. 3 votes. 13 votes. 7 votes. 3 votes. 3 votes. 20 votes.
So what it's doing here is it's going one by one to all the small brackets and reading out the number of votes in there without telling me who those votes are for. So again, not a great accessible experience. And I can, you know, of course, go on and on like that, but you get my point, right? Like beyond doing a great job with accessibility, period. Like that's something that we need to fix. The fourth and maybe the most important of these is the fact that our tools still don't help us achieve data variety. I'll explain what that means in a bit. So I borrowed this concept from this talk called The Future of Data Visualization by Jeffrey Heer. Jeffrey Heer is a researcher and data visualization expert who essentially was one of the first few people who were part of coding D3. He was a co-creator in ProtoViz, and ProtoViz is what eventually became D3. And in this talk, he touches upon different concepts, but talks about this bit from Edward Tufte, who is also an information designer and expert, on how our goal with data visualizations should be to show data variation and not design variation. And if you think of it, that is what, like all these tools like Flourish, Data Wrapper, Tableau, Power BI, R, whatever I might say, like a lot of those offer design variation for sure. Hey, you can tweak colors. Hey, you can use dots and you can use rectangles and you can, like, you know, it's giving me all these all these design aspects that I can add to my visualization, but it's not really helping me hone down on the questions. That instead of asking this question, have you thought about asking that one? Instead of looking at these metrics, what about those ones? And the biggest point in the whole process is that the humans still have to innovate with the questions. And then Jeffrey here goes on and poses this question to the audience, which is, how can our tools help us ask better questions? And once I heard that, I thought like that's really the biggest and most important part of it all, right? We think that you have finding the data and the story is one part of it, and then communicating the story is another part of what we do. And you might think that both are equally important and both might take the same amount of time. Some people might actually think that communicating the story takes a lot of time. That's the database aspect, and what words do I use, and what should I which kind of chart should I make for this chart type, coding that scrolly piece, like all of that's going to take time. That can be a misconception. Whereas the fact of the matter is that finding the data in the story is actually 90% of the work. Communication is only 10%. As someone who does that day to day, the most important thing is to find the story, is to find the key highlight that you want to show. Showing the visual representation is a small part of it, but if you don't have anything interesting to show, there's not much you can do, because no amount of design can save a bad story. And maybe that's the thing I want to leave you with. I want to leave you with the desire to ask better questions. I want you to leave with the desire to explore tools and be part of communities. I want you to be inspired to tell accessible stories that are for everyone. And if you're someone who's never made a chart, I hope this helps you understand that how database really is for everyone. And in this day and age, we are getting to the point where everyone has the tools and tips and tricks to make data visualization. And with that, I would like to end my talk. Thank you so much for listening.
Boa noite de novo, pessoal. Queria só começar fazendo uma errata. A gente está no terceiro dia do evento. Lá no
Good
início eu falei
evening again. I would just like to make a correction. I said we were on the second day of the meeting, but it's the third day. We'll now start the Q&A session.
I am very thrilled to be here with you. I started my career as a motion designer for journalism, and I am a self-taught coder also. So I think we'll have a lot of things to talk about. You started talking about two approaches of stories, explanatory stories and exploratory dashboards. So do you think is it possible to combine the journalist perspective of explanatory stories with exploratory experiences for the reader?
100%. Actually, like, that's kind of what I also think about a lot, that so one approach that works often is that you explain first and then you let the reader explore. So explanation, then exploration, because once you've given them the explanation, they have the context to explore better, to ask better questions themselves as well. So we tried this for a couple of projects. For example, especially during COVID, one COVID example would be, we wanted to do something around herd immunity. So two of my colleagues did these simulations of what happens when social distancing is in place, what happens when vaccination rates are high. So, just explaining these metrics through simulations. And in the end, they give this playable thing where the user can adjust what is the vaccination rate of the population, whether people are moving or not, what's the R naught of this thing. So, and then they see live in action. So first we have explained the science to them, and then we let them play. Similarly, during when we made our COVID dashboards, one of the things that we wanted to think about a lot, that a lot of dashboards end up being data dumps, which is something that I spoke about in the conference as well. Like there's chart, and I don't really know, okay, what am I supposed to look at? Which one is the most important? So we did this thing where our dashboard opens up with sentences. So it would say something like, Brazil has logged the lowest cases since this month, or in Laos, cases are suddenly spiking. So, these factoids pulled from globally from across different countries, generated at random using code. And it started with that. So it did not start with we logged 50 million cases so far. No, none of that, but like more specific stories that maybe not every reporter can go and dig. And there's also that element of discoverability, that I might learn something new for a country that maybe I will not go and check. So as someone sitting in India, me being interested in what's happening in Cambodia may not be like, a thing I would do. I will not go to Cambodia's case page and see. But this element of discoverability makes me look at places where I might not look otherwise, which I think is also the job of reporters, to point readers in directions that like that's why the front page of a newspaper is important, right? It might drive me in different places that I might not go otherwise if I'm just restricted to my social media feed. So yeah, 100%. I think I definitely support merging the explanatory with the exploration part of it.
Yes, I remember an example for the budding. They created a tool for visualizing population, the human terrain, but they used it in a specific story, population mountains. And we have a very good example, Brazilian example, No Epicentro, that is for COVID,
Yeah,
I think this is a very important thing, a strategy to put in the first person experience, so it can raise awareness of a specific situation, right?
Yeah.
It's and do you think is it still important to learn to code? How the coding ability is part of your creative process?
So I think the need to code, something that I spoke about in the talk as well, is that the need to code is slowly declining, because as technology advances so much, that I needed code for 7 years ago, I don't need code for today. So I think like sometimes I question whether I am going to be irrelevant at this point, because there are tools to do everything, most of what I do. So I think the relevance to code is definitely decreasing. Whether it is absolutely diminished or not, I don't think so. There's still some stories. For example, if I'm scraping giant amounts of data, we still don't have the tools to do that. If I have to parse several PDFs, yes, the coding them through libraries will be easier, but I still need to write code for those aspects. If I have to think of a customized D3 visualization, I need to code for that. You do motion design, right? So some of the stuff that you do in After Effects will require people to write expressions. So there are bits and pieces that require us to code still, but that piece will keep getting smaller over time. Like I have no expectations that code will always be there, because now we have OpenAI and things like that, which robot will write code for you even if you need code. So technology is going to reduce the need to do that over time for sure. But for me personally, because I think I'm just like comfortable coding, so a lot of things which other people might do in Excel, I would preferably do it in code. It's just like my language. It's something I am comfortable with, but that's just a matter of comfort. If there's someone who's comfortable with another tool, whichever tool you're comfortable with, I think one should use that. Coding is nothing but a tool at the end of the day. What is more important is that you get the job done, as opposed to what do you use to do the job. So yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. After you engage with coding, sometimes you just want to code. It's faster of using traditional tools. So we have a question of Rafael Gomes de Oliveira. Gurman, do you think journalists today are transparent enough about their political and ideological biases when they create narratives and stories?
I think I lost you for 10 seconds, maybe my internet.
Okay.
But political and ideological biases, transparency, was that it?
Yes. Do you think journalists today are transparent enough about their political and ideological biases when they create narratives and stories?
Okay, so I think this is a very cultural thing. Like different societies have, and different societies have different kind of standard practices around this. What is the norm? What is not? Like I am from India. Definitely in India, it is not the norm to be transparent about your biases. We generally say that, for example, in business reporting, if you're writing on a company that you might have invested in, it's something that you need to declare at the bottom of your story. So like anything, anywhere where you might have had a vested interest, you're supposed to declare it. Like that's what the ethics state. But like when it comes to politics and things like that, slowly the lines are blurring. What we declare, what we don't declare, whether I have contributed to a particular political party's financial campaign or not, is not something I'm going to declare when I'm reporting on them. So I think, yeah, not always for sure. The transparent, I don't know how is it in Brazil. What do you like? Enlighten me on the Brazilian culture or what it might happen. In my country, for sure, the line is very blurred. There is like propaganda subtly translated into reporting and things like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I know that there are countries in which the newspapers are very clear about their ideological biases. In Brazil, I think we know, but it's sort of impartial. Yeah, I don't know. There are newspapers that are more transparent, and there are others there that are not. But I'm not sure. I don't know if we have another question. Oh, I will bring another one from me. So you said that when you started your career, the need to code was high. But if we skip these technical skills, what creative skills are important, and how we can exercise them for designing the data visualizations using the no-code and low-code tools you mentioned?
So I think, yeah.
No, that's it.
I think like one basic thing that I ended the thing with was around how do we think of interesting questions to ask data sets, which is just also very journalistic and reporting sort of thing, right? Like what questions to ask. And I think that's perhaps the biggest piece in the puzzle is what question are you asking? Are you looking at a data set and being like, I wonder why is that happening? Because that curiosity, I think, is the key creative thing to all of this. If you're curious, you'll ask interesting questions. If you ask interesting questions, you'll tell interesting stories. So it is that cycle. Creative, I don't think you have to be an artist for this. I cannot draw to save my life. I do definitely use a lot of pen and paper to sketch ideas. So like all of my visualizations start with pen and paper. Even when I teach, my first database class is sketching charts, because I think one great way to learn is also to put constraints. What happens is when we start using these tools, we only think of in terms of what the tool can do. So, I end up using data wrapper. I might just make a bar chart and a line chart or a dot plot or a map, because those are the 4-5 things a data wrapper can do. I'm not going to think, can I use triangles to do this? Can I like create this tree map sort of a thing and put faces of people on it? These approaches are not necessarily going to come out if I start with the tool. So I think thinking in terms of just what is the best way to tell a story, and then figuring out, oh, which is the tool that will help me do that, is a better approach than to like go inside a tool and be like, okay, what buttons, let me click on all buttons and see which one looks the best. So I think like that's something to think about, that just curiosity, and just think in terms of what's the best way to do this, as opposed to what is it that the tool can do.
Yes, I think this is the best thing about learning how to code, because actually when I get a data set, sometimes I use a tool just to get the first insights of the data set, and then started creating. And if you learn how to code, you can create and merge different graphs and symbols and colors and stuff. That's why the bespoke graphs that you mentioned also. We have another question from the audience. Cristiano, we live in a context of extensive data availability, including microdata publication. However, there are few initiatives exploring this data with data visualization. I would like you to point out some institutions that are able to carry out this communication efficiently and are able to maintain these data visualizations with updated data.
Updated data as in like live data, or like just generally places that do great data viz? I'll go with places.
I think so. I think so. Not live data. I don't know if
I'll think of live data as well. So like in the talk, I spoke about these different industries, right, where that might be using data for communication. So there is journalism, of course, which is the most visible because it's public facing. We see news every day. I like every day in the newspaper, I have charts. I open a website, I have charts. I open their social media channels and I have charts. So I think like the biggest public facing aspect to all of this would perhaps be journalism. And within journalism, your organizations such as NYT, Washington Post, Reuters, Guardian, WSJ, like of course I'll miss plenty, but even La Nación, for example, does great work. And there are several other there is Continentalist in Singapore. So there are these regional publications as well, and not just your big names that do use data viz to communicate, to tell journalistic stories. There are places, you mentioned the Pudding. So the Pudding is this website that does more work around just culture in general. So looking at culture with the lens of data is their specific niche, I would say. So there is that. Then that's more of the journalistic side of things. But then there are also nonprofits that and like research institutions that do very good data viz work. Pew Center does very good data viz. Your Urban Institute, the USGS in the US, which like focuses on the environment. So it's a government institution. So even they use data viz beautifully. NASA has a wing that does data viz. So, you know, there are these government institutions as well. And then there are certain governments that have used data viz for public communication and do it very well. For example, in the Dutch, in German, COVID dashboard.
I think Gurman. Okay.
I was saying the Dutch and German COVID dashboards are also very good examples of using data viz for effective public communication. And I think they're also extremely accessible. The accessibility aspect that I talked about, they also perform great there. So yeah, I think like it's more and more places are doing this now. Yeah, I think those are the some of which I really enjoy. Sometimes when I'm looking for inspiration, I think I also just go to the subreddit Data is Beautiful, and find discover different places to look at. So that is also fun. Yeah.
Okay. It was really interesting when you talked about accessibility. What accessibility best practice do you recommend for creating alt texts?
So there is Amy Casel has this guide I highly recommend people to check out on how to write alt text for charts. I think one key thing that they say is just describe what kind of a chart it is and what is it showing. So a bar chart showing the um, cases recorded every day, and then the key insight that I want, so saying cases recorded every day in Brazil, the trend line the trend line is increasing consistently, or there is a huge spike in the last 7 days. So whatever that insight is, so like giving people what the chart is and then the insight is a bare minimum you can do. Then if you want to if you want to say give additional information where data might be missing, or this is another spike before, so the more detail you can make it, that's great. But the bare minimum would be to say what are you showing and what is the key insight. That's a good place to start. Yeah, like think of a way that one way to approach it is also that for someone who is not able to see this chart, how would I describe it to them in words, and just like write it as a detailed description of what experience do I want the person to have if they cannot see it. So that can be like also another approach if you want to do more creative things with the alt text. For example, like Gabrielle Marie, who is a database designer, does very illustrative visualization. So she might use a blob of paint to make a chart instead of just making a bar. So she might paint things and things like that. So in her description she goes on to write like bars made using blob of paint. So she adds that descriptive visual insight as well, that maybe I want the person to experience this too. So that is another way to think about alt text.
Yeah, when you were talking, I was thinking about this descriptive approach we have for alt text, but you mentioned some creative process and different languages, but you also mentioned in your talk about the annotation layer for creating the stories. So I think it would be another challenge to merge these descriptive approaches for alt text with annotation layers, right?
Yeah, but like at the end of the day, that annotation is also, so for example, that spike I might put in the chart, and on the like for the person who's not using a screen reader, it just shows the annotation. For someone who uses the screen reader, I can just say that
I think her network is a little bit.
Really sorry. So for the gun chart sales chart that I showed in the talk from NYT, it could just say that gun sales over time with spikes on specific dates, and next to those days, so on July 13th the spike is seen because of this, on this month a spike is seen because of this. So the annotation I can then also translate to alt text.
Yeah, great. And do you have any further reading for this accessibility for data visualization? Do you have any references or?
Sarah Time, who I mentioned, is a great resource. They have
Can you
several
repeat it, please?
blog
Because
posts.
it started. The connection is a little bit. Can you repeat?
Sarah Forsyth.
Sarah Forsyth. Okay.
So they have several resources on accessibility. They write blog posts on it all the time. Also have how like some blog posts that are code driven, that how would you recreate say for example the Apple activity rings in D3 and make it accessible, so stuff like that too. So I think that's a great starting point. Amy Casel is another expert in accessibility and database and has some writing around it. There are a bunch of others which I'll probably forget, but I have a resources link on my website where I, whenever I collate readings that can be useful. I will share a link. Maybe you can also share the link in the comments or something. So so that's a list of resources. Some of the pieces that I mentioned are also linked on this page.
Nice. You said, you finished saying about no amount of design can save bad stories. But how can design contribute to good stories? I was thinking about when I first started knowing about data-driven journalism, I always thought about it visually, but there are a lot of data-driven journalism that there are no visuals. So how can design contribute to these good stories?
So I think design can sometimes also help you discover stories. So design is also a very strong reporting tool, for example. So say I'm looking at a corruption scandal, and what I end up doing is I map out all the connections, maybe on paper, maybe using post-its on a wall like they do in the movies, or maybe I'm using a tool, a graphing tool to look who is connected to whom. But in that case, for me to find the person who is, I have no idea. For me to find the person who is the best connected or is like most influencing, I might need to chart it. Similarly, like if I'm looking at suddenly a spike, as you just said, for me to know there's a sudden spike, I'll have to chart it. Because just looking at the numbers will not like visually put the scale of the increase that easily for me. So I see design as even as a reporting tool to find that neighborhood that has the most amount of thefts. For example, if I plotted all thefts, I'm like, something is going on here. I should go on the street and report here. So I see design as a way to also do those discover stories. Say I have a good story and I'm using design how to communicate it better. 100% good design can elevate stories for sure. And there's several examples to this. I think like even more sensitive stories, so stories around abuse, for example, where we don't necessarily want to, we need to protect the identity of the person as well. Illustrations can help us create that emotion that I can't otherwise. So another way where design can help me experience a story better. One example that came to mind just as I was talking about this was that when I used to work for the Hindustan Times, we had this mobile journalist called Yusuf Omar, and he had this idea that he wanted to interview survivors of sexual abuse and acid attacks. And as he was doing that, he, of course, did not want to take the approach where they were silhouetted, because that seems like not so empowering. So what he did was he gave them Snapchat filters, and was like, record your experience using a snapshot filter, and you can pick the filter that you want to use. And I found it a beautiful way to actually empower someone. And I think that's also the power of design, that how can design empower me to tell my story better. So yeah.
Okay, great. We have another question from the audience, Cristiano, who also already did one question. Regarding institutional communication, which ones are able to carry out efficient communication? He mentions that Brazilian public institutions need to publish open data plans. However, these plans generally do not work, do not have data visualizations. There are a lot of they publish the spreadsheets, but without good
Documentation.
dashboards. So it's
Okay.
very difficult for us to actually understand those data. They have to publish, but they are public, but they are not easy to access. We expanded. Oh, okay. But how companies or public institutions can develop better data visualizations. So there are those two things about institutional communication, and companies or public institutions that have to publish with data visualizations.
I think like COVID really made it clear for whom was data a priority, even both in terms of collection and communication. It was a health crisis that was entirely dependent on, you know, good communication, and some governments have succeeded and some governments have failed terribly in setting up both, like in terms of collection and communication. Brazil, actually, I really liked the fact that, and that about the Brazil COVID dashboard, that they were COVID numbers, but then they also had other respiratory diseases on the same space. Now, those were numbers that actually in India, I'm not talking about the reliance and the accuracy of the numbers at all, which I'm sure is contested. Like I'm like, there will be issues with that for sure. But so I'm not questioning that at all. Like underreporting is like has been a problem globally. So it's not even places like Brazil and India that are huge populations. So of course will suffer, not that great infrastructure. So we have our limitations that way. But even developed countries have underreported. So when we have gone out and calculated excess deaths, most countries have fell short. And logging the right number of accurate numbers. But I'm talking in terms of communication. So thinking that we have COVID cases on this thing, and yes, there'll be scenarios where COVID cases will not be detected. So I should put other respiratory diseases as well on the same space. I think that's good strategy. Like that is something that, and you know, even the ability to download the historical cases which the Brazil dashboard had, we were like jealous sitting in India, because in India our government published numbers and then deleted it the next day. So you had to like set up scrapers to keep downloading and saving it. And we had like community organizations that such as Open Data, Open Knowledge Brazil, like, you know, other communities popped up in India that were doing open data work around it, where they wrote scrapers and were saving the data before the government removed it and things like that. So some governments, if it's any consolation, some governments don't even have the download button to get a spreadsheet. So at least some progress, some ray of hope. So like I think the European countries do better. Netherlands, Denmark, Germany have good dashboards. They all like good accessible dashboards. They hire experienced information designers and professionals to do that work. So Maurice Stefano, who is a famous information designer and runs this podcast called Data Stories with another person. So he, for example, led the making of some of these dashboards. So a government going and hiring someone like that, I think shows who's invested and who's not. So yeah, but I'm hopeful. I think is another thing that happened during COVID was that as more and more countries started doing this, other countries that may have not had the resources otherwise felt the need to do something. That even if it was an ArcGIS dashboard that had like one map and 2-3 charts, they thought, oh, we need to have something like our public needs some resource. So as more and more people do this, I think the inspiration will lead others to do it too. So I would think it's something that I was talking about earlier as well during the thing, that the more visualizations we see, the more visualizations we'll be inspired to create. So I'm hoping it's an exponential growth in terms of people picking up the need to do this. Yeah, but so far, of course, more developed countries are doing it well. Government institutions, some institutions such as NASA, I think, do a great job on making a lot of environment related data accessible, easy to view. So if you want, you can download the raw files of things. But if you just want to see, they have the Earth viewer where you can like add layers and view data at a more mass audience level. So I think like there are few institutions that we can learn from, and hoping that more and more places do this.
Yes, when in our context, we had to publish the other respiratory because we didn't have enough tests. So it was kind of a way of knowing the context, our context, right? So, but I was happy when you mentioned Moritz Stefanek.
Yeah.
I had a work of him in an exhibition that I curated here in Rio de Janeiro, and also the pudding. And he has a very great text in his Medium, I think, about data viz for the industry. And he says for dashboards, there are two common approaches. Number decoration, it's a huge number with some icons around it, or here's all the data, good luck. And this very complex dashboards with a lot of graphs, and if you don't have any another text or context about for reading it, it's okay, you are overwhelmed with all those graphs. And it reminds me, I had the opportunity to participate in a long-term project for energy database for the IDB. And what I liked the most about it, it was listening the stories that the economists could read on those graphs. Because for me, I didn't know much about their energy in Mexico in the 80s.
Yeah.
But I think, sorry, okay.
No, go ahead. I was,
Go ahead.
I was saying, like, in terms of, you just talked about energy, right? I got reminded of something. The IPCC report recently that came I think out 2-3 months ago, talking about climate change. So it was something where like a lot of researchers got together to form this report, like to predict what our climate is going to be like, and what are our threats and what are different scenarios looking like. And the one person who was part of the collective was Ed Hawkins, who was also the creator of the climate stripes behind me. So Ed Hawkins, for example, like led that and had 2-3 other great professionals on board who created charts for that. And what was beautiful, exactly what you're talking about, is that after the report came out, the next day most news organization carried the same charts from the report because the charts were that good. Not because like the news organization, they, even if they remade the chart, they replicated the existing chart because it had annotations, it was clear, it communicated well. So I think for something like climate change, an environment in general, which is at a massive threat right now, this clear communication is essential for us to actually also talk about these things, because otherwise these issues might die down. But good data viz has the power to for us to keep talking about these things as well, for more journalists to pick up those stories, and for our audience to also like notice that, oh, it's a problem. Yeah, sorry for interrupting, but I just wanted to add that as a link.
This is a very great, another alternative end for your talk. Great design can keep the story going, right? No amount of design can save bad stories, but a good design can keep the story going.
Nice.
So I don't know if you want to make any another end, final words for this talk.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure interacting with you. Like learning different perspectives is great, and yeah, it was a pleasure interacting with you in with the Coda PR team. So thank you. And if people have any questions, people can reach out to me. I have my Twitter DMs are open, so anybody can message me. I have some resources on my website, so if you're someone who is interested in database, does not know where to start, the Coda BR team will share some links of resources that I curate that if they can be helpful. All the best, and just remember, charts are for everyone. They're not for people who understand math or tech or whatever. Charts are for everyone. So even if it's on pen and paper, even if it's for an Instagram post, make visuals, tell stories. And the most important thing is to have fun. So make sure as you're doing all of this, you have fun.
Great. I wanted to thank you also. It was really nice to meet you. And I navigated your site. It's really good. Eu queria também agradecer ao público, todo mundo que assistiu e enviou perguntas.
I would also like to thank the public and those who asked questions. You can see the schedule on the website, and this Coda BR meeting will take place until Saturday. Thank you, Gurman. Thank you, Open Knowledge Brazil, for inviting me. Good night.